Hello, everyone. My name is Niluka Hoteling. I'm the production manager here at Department of Theater, Brooklyn College. Thank you so much for tuning in. Some of you will hopefully be catching this recording later, posted on the BC resource page. So welcome to episode 1 in a web series that is launching today called Explorations of Digital Theater. So this web series, it was a small seed in my mind, but it really developed in discussion with the technical staff, with the students I was teaching in the spring, with other friends, colleagues, because all of us were sort of in a situation where we were dealing with the unknown. And you know, there were so many sort of stresses in our lives, and like also trying to find room and space to figure out how to teach or figure out how to do art. It just became enormously difficult. And so there's nothing better than to sort of, you know, continue dialogue, especially with artists that have taken that first leap of faith and just launched themselves into new terrain. And so here we are with 2 guests who are, you know, debuting this series, and I'm delighted to announce that both of them are alums of our program. So there's a lot of this whole webisode is a labor of love, and I'm going to have the backstage crew just quickly pop in and say hello to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Byron Anthony. I am a BA student at Brooklyn College, and I'm excited to be here with you all. I will also have my eye on the YouTube chat, so if anyone has any questions over the course of these conversations, please post them there, and then we'll ask those to our guests a little later in the day. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Cody Hom. I am one of the co-editors for the web series. I am also Niluka's assistant as the assistant production manager.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shanu Wilshire. I am also a BC student. I am a co-producer and a co-editor on this. I'm really happy to have you all here, and this will not be the last one. Tune in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Byron and Cody and Shanu. And I will say, you know, this is our first episode. This time yesterday, I will admit that I did not know how to run a web stream and worked it out. So, you know, there's a lot of, there might be some technical difficulties today, just bear with us. All of this is just part of the process. It's all part of the show, as Mac Willman would quote often in his plays. So I would love now to have the guests, our special guests, say hello.
Hi, my name is Daniele. I am a New York-based actor, and I graduated Brooklyn College in 2016 with degrees in theater and journalism. I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm John Michael Rossi. I'm an alum from the directing program in 2006, and it's wonderful to be back with Brooklyn College folk virtually from the UK.
Thank you so much again, John Michael and Daniele. A pleasure is ours to have you, and we're going to roll the tape on the first interview that we did with Daniele. Take it away, Shanu.
Hi, everybody, and thank you to Niluka and Brooklyn College for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Daniele Kogan, and I am an actor based in New York City. I'm the artistic director of the Pressure Players, which is a company founded in quarantine. We're an ensemble-based company. I graduated Brooklyn College as a double major in journalism and theater this past May or June. It's been a really long time. I'm currently based in Staten Island. I've been spending a lot of time with my family, with my dog, and I'm really excited to tell you about our debut project, which is a radio play called Dawn of a Great Panic, based on H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds.
So in terms of the company, this is a piece that's written by the company.
Yeah.
Is it collectively written, or is it one playwright?
So it is collectively conceptualized. I did most of the final proofreading, editing, because I'm a journalist and that is what I do. But the whole thing is very collectively devised. We all, in the process of making this piece, we all read the book, we all drafted scenes, we all, drafted on each other's drafts. We picked out the phrases that worked verbatim for the piece. Dawn of a Great Panic, the title of the piece, is actually a cut directly from the book. All the character names, for the most part, have been changed outside of Herbert and his actual real-life brother, George. But really devised effort. It's definitely not a style I'd written in before, not a style any of us had written in before. And to the us I'm talking about, I should mention our executive director, Greg McGovern, and business manager, Jim Walsh. So they are some very talented local actors that just double as our administrators in this case.
Everybody wears a lot of hats in the company.
Absolutely. Yep, ensemble requires that.
And how long did it take to develop the piece before you got into production?
Oh man. Whoa. So we got into production within the first 10 weeks. It was before it was after everyone started panic buying in March and before we started having the protests like Activate in New York City. So it was in that 12-week cradle that we were trying to document what was happening up until the last minute, sort of make it relevant to the art today, and then color it in a way that didn't come out excessively depressive. So Jim Walsh, Greg McGovern, Thomas Riley, and I, we were all cast in a community theater production of All My Sons on Staten Island. And we had met one time. Literally at the end of February was the first time we'd ever met. And then we were all at one rehearsal or something. We didn't really get the chance to talk. It was for about an hour. And then we went into quarantine. And the cast sort of elected to, we thought at the time it was going to be a very short quarantine. And we elected to sort of rehearse on Zoom. And just as a way to stay fresh, really. And then after a few weeks, Tom suggested we just transition into reading other materials. So we were reading Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, the version that came out that was back when radio plays were a huge, huge element of theater history. And its relevance honestly really invigorated the group. I think we got inspired to make an adaptation of our own because of how accurate it felt. And then I guess we wanted to make something that remedied that feeling of waiting to be creative and adjusting to the pressure that is COVID-19. So I don't know, March 26th, the Pressure Players were born, and this month is our 6th month, which is kind of amazing.
This form didn't induce any kind of fatigue, right? A lot of us are experiencing screen fatigue, but with radio play, though we might shut our eyes to go to sleep at night, our ears are always listening, even in sleep. Have you actually done research on that?
Yeah. Oh goodness, yes. I have done so much, what is the psychology of listening and active language and the ear, and you'll notice, if you take a listen more than once, not that you have to, but maybe. One thing about active and passive voice is really huge. What's funny to me is how much of the primal sense, basically, you activate in your ears. I did a lot of research about like, basically like the human race, right? Like before Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and like hunting and like, what is that? And we realized like, if you hit pause and go somewhere and come back, you're not, like, you've lost the investment, right? It's like running to a bathroom in the middle of a movie. Here, it was about like having you keep up with the hunt. There needed to be a question to the play. That question needed to be answered as briefly, concisely, and interestingly as possible. And for that to happen, we needed to just like constantly engage your ear. So you'll hear like sounds you recognize, and then sounds you don't recognize, and then sounds you don't like, and sounds you like, right? Like everyone loves the sounds of birds chirping. There's different responses to the sounds of protesting, right? How fatigued are we? At that point, it wasn't a social justice protest that was trending in the news. At that time, it was the haircuts, protesting for haircuts. That was like a real thing that happened in America. So we worked that into the show. And like, what's it like to hear chants about that, right? What's it like to directly take that and be like, here it is again for you right in your ear, multitudes of people, and you're like pretty much walking right by them, right? Yeah. That psychology is insane. And I had to very intensely research it in editing down our piece. Our original piece was a little longer than that.
That's a really intriguing sort of thing that you have just sort of revealed, because, you know, in this time as well, with all of the protests that are going on, the concept of listening and hearing was constantly sort of brought up. And I think we sort of take it for granted how we process information. Yeah. You as an artist of radio play, and you and your colleagues, like, that's definitely part of the study, is the psychology of that.
I think if I could add one thing, like that's a huge, so with a family tree which we're producing right now, which is, you know, written by, what's interesting about radio is you could take it from all over the world. So in this case, we have a playwright literally who's living in the South right now. It's his piece. The concept of, so we sort of came into like consciousness about our bias sort of after this was already in production, which is why you won't hear much about it in the show. Do you know what I mean? Which is not to say that it's not a discussion that we're having and we will continue to have. But now in our second piece, right, the concept of like, how do you listen when you're not a trained actor? When you're not taught to stop and be like, what do you want from me right now? What do I want from you? What are the stakes, right? Actors inherently tap into that. Finding a way to colloquially make people tap into that is hard, really difficult. There's nothing I can say that would make it easier. It requires a lot of additional training.
That's a really good, excellent point to make at the end. Everybody just needs training. And, you know, to accept that you need training, you need to be able to have self-awareness about your bias. Thank you. Those are really strong words. I think what's really inspiring is that even when the environment seems like it's not conducive to allowing creativity to happen, yourself and your colleagues and this company and this piece are a really good reminder that it doesn't really matter where the circumstances are. You know, artists coming together do a lot to help other people cope and, you know, help develop community, especially in a moment.
I think we wanted to, well, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I know we wanted to sort of just like help the energy of being static inside, you know, because it's fun to be a homebody until you've been a homebody for 3 months, and then you're like, what do I do? And I think we wanted to at least create that community if we couldn't find that community. And the thing is, you know, sort of a build it and they will come style stuff. Like, we couldn't find it, so we built it ourselves.
That's a great ethos to have. And speaking of ethos, you know, you met your colleagues really one time in person, but you developed this sort of, you know, remotely, this like really trusting relationship. And, you know, I was on the website looking at the code of conduct. It's really wholesome, because a lot of theater companies who have been around for a while are in the middle of dismantling their missions and reevaluating and trying to really just be better, right?
Definitely. I think so. So there's two things that are really important to the company, and these were discussed like at length when we started the project before we started the company. Like, we just wanted to make something, and then over the course of making something, we found out we worked together really well. So when we started talking about what we wanted, and we realized that what we wanted was a company, we wanted to start as well as we could from the outset. And so even though we are not like a tax code company, I don't even know what that is. I don't know how to do that. But we are like a group that is very focused on being an ensemble, that is focused on building and bringing in new ensembles. So it becomes really important to make sure that like there is space for everybody in the room. The best way that I can put this, and I don't want to like put anybody on the spot, but our team, like just administration wise alone, it's 3 generations, it's different backgrounds of race and ethnicity. Some you can see, some you can't. We have different sexuality in the room. There's inclusion of the differently abled. There's inclusion of survivors of trauma and mental health. So as much as we're looking to like protect our ensembles, I think we wanted to make sure like there was something that guaranteed that we were okay too. And so with the code of conduct, I feel like we are trying to establish that everybody has options at all times, sort of regardless of their standing. That it is an ensemble, even if someone takes a position as the director or the artistic director or the business manager or the executive, whatever your title is for that, whatever hat you're wearing, it's just sort of, the best I could put this is that it in no way empowers you more than anybody else, right? Ideally, like in an ideal world, as we work with more voices, specifically like more LGBTQ voices, more BIPOC voices, we start to see changes to that document, right? Every ensemble gets to have input to that document.
When I heard that you were doing this, I got really excited because I knew you already had a little bit of experience in radio.
I love radio. So I sort of grew up on radio. Like, so I'm a first generation American, right? And I grew up listening to like Russian stories on CDs in the car. And so that informed my experience a lot. I went back to a lot of that for writing and research. But in general, more concretely, I ran my campus radio station for 2 years. First as a news director and then as a general manager. So I have run oversight on like audio in general. I'm an audio inspired actor. I think the podcast bubble is very real. So for me, the connection to this forum is like, how do you create opportunity for yourself as an artist? Because the thing is, if you wait for the big audition, right, it doesn't come. If you show the people behind the table at the big audition what you've done in general in advance, then the only thing that's left to do is invite you into the room, right? So I think society is coming toward a reality where we're mostly listening instead of watching, or like we're doing something and watching. And I wanted to adapt to the reality instead of like stamp my foot down and be like, no, You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And what is it like to rehearse this piece? How about demystifying it a little bit for us? What's behind the curtain there?
The metaphor of what's behind the waiting room of Zoom. Oh man. So a lot of design, actually. When you build a radio play, if you build something you cannot see, it's easy to do when you're on stage as an actor. Everything that's supposed to be seen is provided for you. So when you're listening to a project, you have to make sure everyone sees the same thing. And that includes the people in the room. So there was, to demystify the process, right? After reading, and I mean like intensely, repetitively reading the source material, which is War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which is in the public domain because nobody has money for copyrights on a budget of $0. It was a lot of production meetings of sketches of what is the color of the play, what is the tone of the play, what do the aliens look like that we're talking about, what sounds are we thinking when we hear this phrase, when you hear Dawn of a Great Panic, what springs to mind, what image, what color, what movie, what music. So there was a lot of design elements initially. When it came to rehearsing, we adapted the format. One of the things you hear if you listen to the play, which you totally should, I hear it's pretty good, is a Skype call, right? Or a Zoom call of some kind. It's literally a video call. And like everybody is in this moment right now where all we're doing is video call. So you're gonna recognize that. So we had to pick, something that would be easy to rehearse on the internet is something that happens over the internet, right? So anything that happened between characters online, or anything that happened that wasn't necessarily like a group experience, was rehearsed on Zoom. And then when it became available, we met for socially distanced, like temperature measuring rehearsals, where we stayed as close to 6 feet apart as possible. But that didn't happen until the last 2 weeks. That was just 3-4 hour blocks of everybody pretty much in masks and covered in hand sanitizer, gesturing and creating a cast energy. So that, I hope, sort of demystifies it. Oh, should mention costumes. Costumes are very important for actors. At one point, we did invite actors to bring costumes into the studio when it came time to record, which is a whole other situation I should talk to you about. But yeah, bringing costumes into the studio was super helpful. Design is such a critical element of a radio play that you don't think about.
I find it fascinating that the tools used on stage, those things are still mechanisms for allowing the actor to transport themselves. I was listening to the voices. There's many characters. How many characters do you play?
Oh man, I played 3. I should definitely know this, but there's approximately 20 parts in the show that are split between 5 very talented actors. And it was up to all of them, right, to establish voice work, which is critical. Rehearsing for that, it was easy to do warm-ups, socially distanced in person, but when it came to rehearsing online, anything that wasn't a meeting to talk about the characters and the connections in the piece literally required straight effort from the actor. Just nothing but you need to vocally rehearse at home. You have to work on your enunciation. I cannot be there sort of to help you. We had a lot of, not that I should have been, but thankfully the actors that we had were so dedicated and so motivated by the script, and everybody was just feeding into it. They couldn't not. It was hard to you would feel bad if you didn't do a vocal warm-up, which was kind of funny. It was a good time.
I was really struck by the pacing of the whole piece, and I was curious because when the dialogue is happening between the characters and there's a lot of sort of overlap, I was expecting to hear more space it's an extraordinary bit of gymnastics vocally. And I encourage our viewers to definitely have a listen. I'm curious, how many takes did it take to record it? Was it really actually a full run?
So, okay. We everybody that was concerned with nailing a particular voice recorded their lines for that character first. And then we established breaks as close as we could to, like, I won't say equity rules because we weren't there for long enough. Like, it's a non-equity show. We weren't there long enough for equity rules to apply. But it was a full run at the end. And initially, everybody who was very concerned or anything that we were really worried about coming too close, because sometimes these characters are being played by the same person and they're right next to each other, like they're talking to each other. So things like that we would record separately. Recording, I kind of want to tell you about. We did not have the money to record in the studio. Everything that this project is fundraised by the community, which is very giving and very wonderful. We prepared spaces at home. Like, we had done extensive research and testing at home, and we found out that we were ready to do this, like, standing surrounded by winter clothes in a dark closet with a flashlight and our smartphone. And then when we finally got a little funding, we were like, oh, you know what? Let's get lav mics and then mail them to everybody's house and then pay a sound engineer to put the files together in a nice way. Which would have also been an astronomical nightmare because mailing costs a lot. Yeah, one thing I've learned is in artistic director is how much things cost. But thankfully, via some very amazing, incredible people, we got the funding we needed to be safely socially distanced in the studio. So thank you to ET, I think. ET Studios really made that happen. They ensured we were safe and ensured everything was done. Like, maximum security was great.
Excellent. I mean, the radio play sounds so deceptively simple, and what you really revealed, Daniele, is just, it's maybe even more strenuous, it seems.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting is, like, we've realized that at least through the end of the year, radio plays are our future, because we're sort of like a up by the bootstraps company, whatever that means. So what we've done is tried to get really inclusive in terms of who we feature, what we talk about. We set a theme for our first season. Our first season is based on creative perseverance, right? So we have a playwright from the South with a play coming out in November. That's going to be our first play with a narrator, which is a way more traditional approach. This was a very immersive piece. The next piece is going to feature more of a story arc, which is something I'm really excited about because it's interesting when you don't have narration, how much you have to show. Show don't tell in general applies to actors, but show don't tell applies exponentially in a radio play.
In terms of all you've revealed to us, what are the really unique things about the radio play form?
Really unique things about the form. Okay, so no form is perfect, but I think this form in particular is to some extent an equalizer. It's a radio play requires you to paint a world as you see it in your mind. And, if you're actively working toward inclusion and diversity, you're going to hopefully be questioning what's your impression of the world? What is the voice you're hearing associated with? What do you think that looks like? Why do you think that looks like what it does? We're actually, honestly, one thing I'd love help with, and I feel like we've started talking about this, is how do we, the pressure players, sort of make sure that attention is constantly drawn to our bias as people in society, as an audience, but also as a creator. Like, how do you make sure that's always something that people can feel comfortable approaching in the room without feeling isolated or without feeling like, oh no, we're going to talk about this heavy topic, right? So that's definitely one thing about the form. I think the second thing about the form, it is proof to me that there is always a way, sort of. Like, I think one thing I saw that was really disheartening was people lose sort of hope and faith in the industry. Like, people thought that there was no reality where you could be an actor anymore, or you can't possibly be a designer anymore. The theaters are closed till next year. And even then, it's going to take you 2 years to get back to work, right? So I disagree with that respectfully. And I think if you want it bad enough, you will build it, and anyone else that wants it bad enough will come, which requires accountability. This form requires accountability. You cannot cheat yourself. They're going to hear it. Like, if you can sort of come to rehearsal and be like, I'm going to mark it. You cannot mark a radio play. You can't. It's just not going to work. Yeah, those are probably the two biggest things about the form.
Thank you. And that actually answers the sort of, last question I had for you, which was some words of advice, but you've already given us your words of advice. Any more about just creating in sort of a time where it really feels like the wrong time to create, but there's never a wrong time to create?
Okay. So it is an incredible privilege to be sitting on this panel right now because it does not feel real. Like, this entire experience, the building of this company, it does not feel real. I graduated 3 months ago. And in the last 3 months, I have learned that if you wait to be allowed to create, you're never gonna create anything. You have to, well, I won't say what you have to do because that's on every person, but I think as an artist, you sort of, if this is what you want to do, like if this is legitimately the thing that you want to commit your life to, and you acknowledge the reality of what that might look like, right? All the scary, like, what if I can't pay my rent? Like all of that. Then you need to learn your strengths. You need to play to your strengths and delegate to your weaknesses, sort of. Because, how can I put this? I think I learned this first being a shop steward, but I was reminded of this over the course of making this play, is it feels amazing to do things on your own all the time. You feel so empowered. But what's not amazing is jeopardizing something that is much bigger than you, that has the potential to be super impactful because you want to prove you're independent, right? So playing to your strengths, like I knew that I was more of a writer, and I knew that like there was no way I could write parts of it and also be playing, 4 or 5 parts of the show. It was impossible. Delegating, like what could be said by somebody else? How do we have equity in the piece? What is that? Who do we need? What kinds of skills are we looking for, right? Like, because I know Adobe Audition, but there's no way it would have made it sound like that, And in general, I think just lacking fear. Or if you do have fear, then like using it to propel you. I think artists are scared to ask for compensation in general all the time. And that comes in many forms, like money or, and I'm sorry if I'm going on too long, but artists are scared to ask for compensation like money and gratitude and just general respect. And like you deserve all those things. And the only reason you feel that you don't is because people have pretty much absorbed the idea that art is not like a stable industry, basically. I don't believe that to be the case. Right? Because everybody went into quarantine, and what's the one thing everybody started doing all at once? Experiencing art. So if they're going to do it, and it's what you want to do, then I think you owe it to yourself.
I think that's a really good wisdom to sort of remind everybody that you shouldn't feel bad about asking for compensation, because just listening to all the things that your company had to do to execute this piece, and how many hours of work that must have been. And, you know, it's well worth, you know, I think it's $7.99 is what you charge.
Yeah, here's
download.
Yeah, it's $8 to download. Here's what's really interesting is because we're a non-union company that is actually not even officially a company, we found a way to like legally give pretty much all the money back to the artists, which is amazing because a lot of them are unemployed, or not unemployed, but don't really have the capacity to work right now. And not talking about like in their field, I'm talking about like in general. So all that money, like everyone forgoes their title pretty much and splits it pretty much evenly. Like everyone gets 20% of whatever it is. And then the company like is recouping the cost of the project. No one is like actively making money off your $8, which is amazing. So I really hope people get into it, you know, because it won't take too many buys for artists to have like a stable minimum wage check. But like I think it's a fair trade I think it's a really fair trade for 35 minutes of something that'll make you smile that you could keep forever, right? Like it's not like we're taking it away. It's not a one-time experience. So yeah, please buy the play, you know?
Great. Thanks so much, Daniele. Thank you so much for your time and having a chat. As I was saying at the end of that interview, thank you again, Daniele, for your time. We went well over into the night in our conversation, and those were like the key points. I also want to congratulate the Pressure Players. That was a gem of a first piece. Delighted to see that you have a whole season planned, and I hope our viewers will also tune in. They can be found on Facebook, also thepressureplayers.com, all one word. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Shanu, who is going to introduce the next piece, which is John Michael's Leaving a Nun.
Thank you, Niluka. I'm just going to read a few of John Michael's words. Tim O'Reilly suggests that the process of making art and the process of research are both discretely continuous and continuously discrete. If when imagining, one steps back from the world into another realm, there is a pause or rupture in the continuous direct experience of phenomena. This enables one to reflect on and necessarily distance oneself from the world. In the process for leaving anon, a conscious stepping back from the world into another realm was problematized in a rupture where the responsibility to socially distance made it difficult to distance oneself from the world. It is our hope that sharing a view into this process might add to and provoke discussion on the possibilities of how teaching and learning the craft of theater making might continue in the digital realm come fall.
Post MFA degree life take you?
Oh gosh, into the unknown, right? Well, while I was at Brooklyn College, my intention was to figure out how to start a theater company. That was what I was doing in the background of the degree, and that's when I met you. And as you know, we kind of right on the cusp of finishing the degree, we started Newfangled Theater, which was this kind of independent, fringe, DIY, kind of scrappy theater company trying to figure out how to just create work in downtown Manhattan, really, and whatever like corners of the city we could find to perform and rehearse in. But that didn't pay the bills, obviously. And I started doing some teaching artist work and with a variety of different arts organizations around the city. And that kind of really started to snowball. One job led to another and led you to another organization, and you go to a conference. And I started to become really passionate about education. In some ways, not to say that it mattered more than the work that we were creating within the company, but it felt more socially engaged and more like that that I could kind of make a change by bringing in new approaches to theater making into curriculum. And I was working with the Women's Project, and it was about bringing in female playwrights into school curriculum. And I had an opportunity to be part of a founding faculty of Brooklyn Theater Arts, which is in Canarsie, and that was about integrating theater into core subjects, and kind of embracing, different approaches to kinesthetic learning, and I was putting playwriting into math classes, and process dramas into history classes, and all sorts of things like that. And I guess the two things were speaking to each other, like kind of creating this work with a theater ensemble, and creating this work with students and teachers all around the DOE in classrooms, started to really kind of, seal an aesthetic or a voice or approach to making theater. And that led me to decide to leave New York and go do a PhD in the UK, in part because I was working for 6 organizations that had no health insurance. But I wanted to kind of break away and leave America and get a different perspective on things. And I thought I'd be here for about 3 or 4 years, and now I've been here for 9 years. And I'm currently working at the University of Northampton, where I'm the head of the BA in drama. And prior to that, I was working at University of Bedfordshire, where I had a very similar position as the head of BA in theater. That was a bit rambling, and I skipped over things, but I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that did answer the question. By the time COVID sort of really caused closures and shutdowns, you and your class had already extensively worked on material, and you were ready to go into production. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were. This piece was not a response to COVID. It was actually a response to the premise for the play was slightly inspired by last summer. I forget which hurricane. There was a really bad hurricane, or a couple of bad hurricanes coming about to hit the States, and it was in the news or in the tabloids that Trump was contemplating whether or not one could nuke a hurricane. And then my mind kind of went into I could see a variable where he would do that, or try to do that, and maybe there'd be a group of people that lock themselves in a bunker, right? And that kind of was the beginning of the premise, was that there were a group of people that didn't know each other, that bought into something to escape a natural disaster, and we never said what that was. And we developed that play from December to the first week of March, was when we did a staged reading of the 2/3 of what the full script was. And then we went into lockdown a week and a half later.
So in terms of, must have been really difficult to be, I think everybody across the globe, especially doing theater, where they were in situations where shows shut down, there was a huge moment of sort of grief and loss, because, and dealing with the unknown. And we've already mentioned the word unknown several times before. And it's such an interesting kind of idea, because that is kind of built into the theatrical process. When you venture and sort of commit to a show, you're taking a risk. You never know what's going to happen. How did you overcome the struggle of how did the students deal with it, and how did you deal with it? Was there a moment where nobody was actually engaged in wanting to do this virtually, or how did you kind of end up with deciding to move forward with a virtual production?
It was all, I guess when we went into lockdown, we kind of were maybe about 2 weeks behind the States. So our kind of official lockdown date was the 20th of March. But which is basically when, for us, our season, it's kind of when everything is going up, because we wrap up the term right before Easter. So we were going to have about 5 or 6 student productions go up in the span of March, early April. And basically a pin got put in all of those, right? I began to I was like, it can't be a 2-week process, because screen fatigue is real, and I was already experiencing it just from sitting in a meeting for an hour or two. So thinking about how to suddenly translate a production process onto something online. I admittedly also have no experience with film, screen, TV. I've stayed away from it my whole career. I'm very passionate about live theater, right? So what would be the platform? What would it be? How do we do it? You know, there are all these questions circling. It's like, but we've got to do it, right? I sent them an email with a very kind of detailed guidance packet and a kind of outline of what the 6 weeks would look like. And there was the, you know, talking about unknown again, like there were things that I was like, this is how we're going to begin. This is what we're aiming for, but I don't know where it's going to lead us. We also had a loop because they were broken up into different design teams. And I had a marketing team, which I was like, there's nothing really for them to work on to market this because we don't really know what the thing is going to be. So we created a documentary team, and we decided that we were going to kind of create a documentary of the process of creating this thing. And then the other thing that we always do every year, which is the Titus and the Aristaya, they've been published as kind of DIY self-publishing projects that I have here. They're kind of like,
Oh, great.
And it's a self-publishing project where we take the script, it's the finalized script, we get some student essays, sometimes the staff writes an essay, other materials and residue from the process go into the book, and then it's kind of like a little memento, and it goes on Amazon, they get public, they get kind of, what do you call it? Credited in the play, and I was like, all right, well, maybe those are the outputs, right? Like, we're producing a play, but a play always has a literary life and a performative life, right? And I can't promise what the performative life will be. Normally, we're working towards this performative moment. Now we're going to work towards just developing the piece. And I kept saying, and we'll have a button at the end of it.
I think you were sort of going backwards and forwards with your colleagues about doing a live stream versus a pre-recorded. Were you in one camp or the other when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, I was hardcore, like, this is about DIY. It's gonna be as live as possible. We're not gonna try to be like fancy pantsy, like, use special effects, and I knew we didn't have time for it. We didn't necessarily have the capacity, or I didn't have the knowledge for what the capacity could be, right? I think maybe that scared me a little bit. But my colleague Paul, who he's theater tech design extraordinaire, and a great educator, and he also has a real interest in digital theater and digital theater aesthetics. And he also has a background in documentary film editing. So he had a lot of he was ready to always offer up a technical solution, right? And this is kind of, you want that kind of personality in the room, even before we get into kind of digital theater making, right? But I was kind of like, no, we gotta let's not assume we can edit and clean it up at the end, because I wanted to push the students to really be solution finders and find the possibilities rather than kind of clean it up and fix it and edit it all together in the end. So we were both on these opposite ends of the spectrum, and Paul started kind of buying in and realizing and going on, I think he was getting into when kind of the unknowns would birth out of these moments in rehearsal, and someone's camera would freeze, or the things were pixelated, and actually those were good things, right? Like, they weren't problems, they were things to maybe capitalize on, right? And so he's moving this way, and then I'm seeing the clock is ticking, and the students, I've promised them a button, but really they want to show, they want to, what is the thing going to be at the end? And I'm moving towards, all right, I don't know how live this can be, because the piece is easily 80, 90 minutes, probably too long maybe, right? But all it takes is one person's Wi-Fi to drop. All it takes is for one person to have someone doing garden work with a lawnmower blowing in the thing. And these are all things we dealt with in rehearsal, which were funny and you worked around, but it also made me aware of how precarious the whole thing is, right? When you're relying on, I don't think I even asked you, you asked about how many people. There were about 25 students, 20 to 25 students, yeah. Plus then me, Sarah, Rory, and Paul, 4 staff members that at all different variables and times. And also, it all hinged on my Zoom account, right? So if it's funny thing is that my internet never really dropped through the process, but the day that it was going to stream, that entire day up until the evening, my internet was down. And I was just just go figure, right? If we were going to do it fully live on that day, we would have been tech running and my internet would have been down, and
Oh, wow.
there goes the whole thing, you know. We did like a final take of every scene or sequence. So, you know, there was still, I think we were talking about this the other day, there was still these kind of, it was almost like doing a cue to cue on the final take day, right? And so each scene was isolated, take a run, give some notes, take another run, right? And but again, you were gambling because it's like that first take was kind of good, but I really want to get in there and kind of tweak a couple of things and ask so-and-so to make these adjustments. All right, we got it, good, let's do it again. And then like it's going great, but then like someone's internet drops or something freezes and you're like, oh, well, let's try it one more time, right? You know, and then you might end up going and taking that original take, because what we didn't get into is like splicing and cutting up. We took like one whole take and then a puppetry sequence that we weaved into that. Like we didn't get into any sort of masterful, fancy editing because we wanted it to have that kind of rough cut feel that the piece would have had in a live space. Like, you know me, I love my transitions, right?
Yeah.
But like, transitions are suddenly different, have a different reason or functionality on a screen rather than a stage, you know.
It's interesting you mentioned transitions, because I want to sort of bring up a few things about the mechanisms of storytelling that you use. When I watched the piece and I was giving you some feedback, one of the things that I loved was that there was a lot of variation in the delivery of the story, and the viewer, me as a viewer, was still able to follow the story, but I really enjoyed going from moments where I'm listening to a dialogue and it's sort of like with the Zoom windows, but then you sort of change out of that into using narration, there's puppetry, there's also shadow puppets, and all of these sort of like different aesthetics that you use in the storytelling. Curious to know if they developed because of going digital, or were these already sort of part of the sort of production's concepts, and then it was able to translate better?
Well, they were layers that were already kind of part of the initial process, the puppetry particularly. So we, for the past 2 years, I've been working with a puppeteer by the name of Oliver James Hymans, who comes in and joins us in the process. And this particular year, we were talking, we said, like, let's do shadow puppetry. Let's explore shadow puppetry as a thing. I had about 4 or 5 old school overhead projectors that I'd found in stock at the university. And I was like, I want to use these, like, you know, so that's what that was kind of the reason we were doing shadow puppetry, because there were these overhead projectors, and me and Oliver were like, yeah, let's do shadow puppetry. And a series of workshops kind of led to not only explorations of the shadow puppetry with like objects and designs on the OHP, but then also looking at like large sheet structure with the students creating silhouette puppetry performances. So that kind of, when we were developing the play, the puppetry splintered into 2 narratives, where I was like, all right, there's going to be something that is like the shadow puppetry, which is, I was imagining were pieces of Professor Gorilla's archive of lesson plans, right? And that those would, when we were in the pre-production meetings, we were talking about that Professor Gorilla would have been in this bunker, but in a kind of out of time, out of place classroom space that had like all teaching material, like chalkboards and abacuses and typewriters, and it's like educational tools through the ages, right? And the puppetry would come out of his space, like, you know, he'd open up the drawer and a shadow puppetry would like kind of would come in, and there, like the surfaces of the desk and stuff would be projected on. And then the idea was that these silhouettes, these kind of more movement-based performances, would help tell the story of what's going on outside the bunker. We were creating the work in the space that we were going to be performing it in. So, you know, it was about shaping the narrative and the story specifically to that performance space and the resources. You know, we had, you know, suddenly doing it digitally, I was definitely not going to give up the puppetry. Like, you know, we had Oliver come and work with the students for a term, and we had 2 different puppetry teams. We had, you know, the puppeteers, the shadow puppeteers, and the silhouette performers. And I was like, all right, but we're going to have to figure out how to just do it on here and on the screen. And like, actually, everything was locked up at the campus. They like all of our materials and the things that were kind of accumulating we didn't really have immediate access to. And everyone was also like, went home, right? Like people were spread around England, right? Like
because you were already sort of like, embracing that element in the classroom, in terms of like your rehearsal, did you change the format of your rehearsal?
So they were actors, and then they were also like in different design teams. So the design team, in the first couple of weeks, they had tasks to go out and do their own. Basically, they had to audit, like the scenography team had to meet with every ensemble member and audit their home. And like what space will you be in? Are there other spaces? Do you have a blank wall? Do you have a wall with pattern? Like what, well lit, not well lit? Where's your Wi-Fi router? And also like they'd also become aware of, I guess, the sensitivities of some people being like, no, I can only really stay in my bedroom because whatever's going on in my house. And everyone had their own variable. So they had these like getting to know you moments which they captured and they filmed. So they could explore all those possibilities. The costume designers did the same thing with every ensemble member and their closet, right? And audited their wardrobes and were like, do you have this? Do you have that? What colors do you have? And they captured all that information. Meanwhile, we were kind of rehearsing, doing, I guess, table work or screen work, kind of because they now had the final draft of the play, and there was a lot of we had to go back in and do some analysis work. And I guess on the performance end, you talk about the camera angles and stuff. It became clear to me that we were, 2 weeks in, and we had already fallen into like sitting performing, which I hate, and it's a very physical, the module that we do is usually very rooted in physical theater and movement, because they do all this animal work, and we do this work off of their animal spirits, off of this astrology website, where they kind of have to create a base character off of these animals, and suddenly like we lose all that work, right? Or it's they're sitting, or they're in their house and they don't really feel comfortable getting too loud, or they're in a very small room where they can't really move around in full body, and everything is kind of like here, right? So I'm starting to think like, all right, there ain't no way I'm going to start getting all of these guys to like get up and move around and go wild and be hyper physical, but we can start to think about like, certain characters always being at certain angles, right? And they thought I was crazy because I was asking them to do stuff like that. And part of the reason they thought I was crazy because they couldn't necessarily see. This is part of the problem with kind of the Zoom theater, is that it was privileged to my screen and where the boxes were. So I was trying to think scenographically around how are these heads arranged on a screen in particular ways for the storytelling that might have looked different on their screen, because the ordering of the boxes aren't always the same. So I was going for this and trying to kind of create this composition and then pin these faces down to these different angles based on also what they were comfortable doing, or like, who had a piece of furniture they can put their phone on or whatever. Then meanwhile with the design, so that was going on. And then I flipped back to these design meetings that the students were having. I watched the videos that they submitted of their audit sessions. But what became clear was that, particularly for scenography and backgrounds, that like no one had anything that was going to give us a uniform look of a bunker. Virtual backgrounds then, right? We have this feature where we get this image and put it back, and this, I know they were like, why did we just do all these sessions with everyone in their home to then come to the decision that we're not going to be actually in their home? It's like, well, we didn't know that until we gathered all this information. It's not a waste. And there may be other times or other parts of the play where we might actually be like, oh, remember that hallway that you were in? Or, like the Silhouette performers ended up figuring out that they weren't going to have a virtual background, and they were going to use a sheet like they had used in the classroom, but they had to find the right space with the right lighting, right? The Puppeteers was a whole other thing of like, well, actually, we're not really creating these things on an overhead projector, but we're playing with them against the screen and kind of then looking at what happens you know, by moving objects with like the virtual backdrop.
So JM, thanks for sharing your screen at this moment. Can you talk about what we're looking at here? These are, yeah.
So yeah, this is the bank of possibilities. Once I had mentioned earlier, the scenography, we moved away from kind of people's live homes that we were going to use virtual backdrops. It was about thinking about, all right, well, what would be some sort of surface that can be replicated that creates the walls of this bunker, right? And it was kind of fortuitous that earlier in the years, we have a artist that comes in, Rachel Champion, who's a scenographer and a sculptor, and she's positioned very similar to yours over at Goldsmiths University. And she comes and works with the students and earlier in the year to think scenographically. So suddenly, I think that work around surfaces was still like kind of stayed in their minds, but now it got digified, right? So I was like, so I asked them, I said, go photograph interesting surfaces around your own home and throw them in that folder called Bank of Possibilities. And I don't know, I gave them a few days to do it so that the next rehearsal, I was going to kind of try them out. And over a series of the next day or two, like even on breaks, I would just throw a different one up on my own background, or I would ask different people to kind of put them up to see what a lot of them look like or a little of them look like. So there's this one that's the cheese grater here, which everyone loved, and I didn't even know it was a cheese grater. I loved it more once I found out it was a cheese grater, but it's far too busy. It's too psychedelic and like looking like one of those posters you would buy in Spencer, you know, that like has an optical illusion hidden in it. I just dated myself, Spencer, the store exists. But I was like, no, like 9 of those on a screen is too much, right? Less is more. I quite like this one for a while, but then the variables of like, are they all going the same way, or do we need to flip and reverse them for certain people? Became,
oh, that's interesting.
In the play, you know, the play kind of in that last final sequence, you know, where we're far into the future and this bunker life has continued on. Now there are different people from different bunkers that are kind of cross-pollinated, was that some of the characters from the narrative get killed off, that like, you know, we wanted to show that they die in time. So in the script, it says that they show, you would have seen their silhouettes on a memorial screen to kind of mark the passing of them, or some of them left the bunker and went into the canals, right? So we wanted to show all that through silhouettes. Now, the silhouettes had transformed into something else in this digital world with the 2 very specific actors with the sheets, and the puppetry had become something else. So these memorial screens, which were being imagined for something that might have been like a final image at the end of a stage play, it was still in the script that they were going to be memorialized somehow, right? So I had asked them to take pictures of the actors, like they're like to get the shape of their body, which we might kind of create a silhouette. And then it occurred, so like they had done this, right? I had also thrown into the mix Basquiat was going to be the aesthetic that we were going to look into and part of that, because we were imagining that there might have been like scrapings on the walls or something like that, and thinking about the animal spirits, and there was just something about the Basquiat aesthetic that I wanted to kind of thread through the play to give it that feel, particularly with the shadow puppets and things like that. And this then was the opportunity where I asked them to, well, just draw on top of the picture, right? Like, and create some sort of Basquiat drawing of each of those characters that need to get memorialized. And then, so they were doing that. And then I had asked them, I said, well, is there a way to take the photograph out now? You scribbled on top of them, pull the photo out. And I think it was Paul, my colleague, mentioned this software called GIMP. I don't know if, so that, then they were like, oh, GIMP, I don't know, they didn't know about it either. And they went and explored it and taught themselves it, and then they were able to create this. And then, so they created more of these Basquiat, they pulled the photo out, they were able to kind of fill it out more. And then these geometric shapes, that's the makeup design for that character that was from the makeup drafting that the makeup designer had done. So I was like, now go grab the geometric shapes that are on that person's face, and that will kind of go on there. So they had done that. And that was, I thought that was it, right? Like I thought, all right, those are them. And then I was like, we're not done yet. Like, and it was a very late inning kind of last minute edit. I wanted them busier and wilder. So I took them, and this is just through Excel, I think. I drop and drag the images and made them translucent and just collaged them together. So it's just the same one that they initially designed.
Right.
But it also, and that sort of mod Star Trek-y kind of futuristic kind of world that was sort of, you know, I was like, oh, I want some sort of sleek, slender, minimalist, futuristic costumes that maybe have some utilitarian elements on it, right? And when we were on campus pulling stuff out of our costume stock and pieces and thinking about things, and then we didn't have any of that stuff, and we were down to everyone's wardrobe. Again, just like we couldn't get anyone's walls to match, finding 15 students they all have like their classic theater blacks.
Yeah.
But as far as kind of even just making sure everyone had a solid like long sleeve thing, like there were all these variables. And I thought that for the eye, the uniformity would be a lot more important and then it became clear that they were only really performing from the shoulders up anyway. So why not just make everything sleek? And the makeup became the thing, because the makeup designers had this concept around much earlier on in the process around facial, like makeup designs that block facial recognition. You know about this stuff? Like,
no, I don't, but that's really interesting.
So like it's all these like shapes and like geometric shapes that then block the facial. So they brought this research in. I was like, this is awesome. That could be the design. And I was like, also we could harken to maybe the animal spirits. Like if you're a leopard, right? Like, but you have geometric, but it's more geometric, you know, like that kind of more like pop arty. So I was like, actually, that's enough. Like they're all going to have a very particular design on their face. They'll have a matching black tops. And then the headbands was the thing, like, you know, I had this luminescent fabric that we were using in the devising class, and I went back to the campus and I got the fabric and I cut the headbands out and I mailed them all out to them, you know, and everyone got a package with a headband and that was it, you know. But again, it was like, there was a little bit, I could tell that there was frustration of like, we've spent all this time like trolling through everyone's closets and coming up with possibilities, to then come to a production meeting where we talked through them and decided that everyone's going to wear a black top. You know, and you know, our motto like with the program is that you put the work at the center, and that the play, the work you're creating is at the center of the process, and therefore no ideas are precious, and everything that you spend the time thinking and gathering information is never a waste. You know, I use this term that I know it's a bit crude. It's like killing your darlings, and the students always quote me on it. But like, it sounds terrible to anyone who's not in the process of like, killing your darlings. But like that, there's no idea that's precious, right? Like, you got to make a play is this complicated mechanism, right? And you got to figure out what makes it work. And sometimes the brilliant idea in week one now needs to go because it got us all these other brilliant ideas later on. And I think with this process, that was more than ever the case.
Even though virtual that's a set of tools that a lot of theater folk are not comfortable with, and neither were you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's deconstructing what theater processes, which are rooted in certain traditions or rituals or practices that have their good points and their bad points, right? Like, so on a very nuts and bolts rudimentary ground, like there's certain ritual to maybe how you establish how your rehearsals start, or how the ensemble comes into the space, right? And I'm real kind of strict about that. Like, you know, you cross the threshold and then you're kind of moving and you're focused on the space, and it's not, you know, the chit chat stays outside the room. You know, our studios, you can't have shoes on, so there's like a kind of room where they put their shoes and things like, so there's these kind of very basic fundamental rituals and procedures before you get into the space. And when you get into the space, that suddenly needed, well, like I couldn't really replicate that world. There are different sets of procedures that each individual needed to go through, and hopefully, and before they logged on or they entered the room, and then actually the Zoom room in the 10 or 15 minutes rehearsal became this kind of little banterish space where people talked about their lockdown lives, which normally I wouldn't have wanted that, like in the room, because the music is on, the movement is happening, and if you come in the space, you're stretching and you're warming up. It's like, well, no, it's like actually it's different, right? So in some ways, those processes get deconstructed, but I think also the hierarchies of more traditional theater structures get kind of deconstructed, and like director traditionally is this person that has all this control, but like actually you have to keep relinquishing it, and it's better off to relinquish it, I think, in some way. So, like it was really weird the day that the last performance happened, that I wasn't in a tech booth like hovering around a theater to make sure everything was where it needed to do, and I didn't know the piece was in Paul's hands, and he was streaming it through his server at a particular time to hit go. And all I could do was order a pizza and wait and hope that it sort of, even earlier on in processes, like you never know who has the answer, right? And I don't know, there's some technical issue around the backdrop in the Zoom thing, and one of our students, Mayo, had figured out on his own time, oh, there's a glitch, and if you go into Zoom and you change this setting, and it solved it. And he had to explain it 15 times because every day someone else had that issue. And I was like, oh, Mayo, what was that thing that you figured out, right? Like everyone's figuring stuff out to make the project work, right? And you got to give space for those things to happen. Whereas I guess, directing in a space, in a traditional setting where there's the stage manager and all these kind of procedures, and like we're all fixed to kind of be a particular way, suddenly all that got thrown out the window, and we're all these heads on a screen. And it's like, all right, well, I got the plan for what we're going to do today, but you're going to take us on the journey. And
that must have been also interesting, not only as a director and the cast relationship, but as a teacher and student relationship. And I think a lot of folks that are educators are feeling how also like COVID has sort of equalized the playing field also between sort of the educator and the students. And that must have been even sort of a little bit more apparent here, because you're also learning the digital technology. You're trying to have a plan for your students, but you're also trying to, so that must have been an interesting sort of moment of, for you as an educator, not only as a director.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I guess I enjoy, like, once it started, I started enjoying figuring shit out, or like figuring out what didn't work or what was possible. I was surprised. You can't assume that what people know and don't know about digital technology, because there were some students that like struggled just to get the Zoom working on their laptop, right? And then there were other students that were like wizards and were working off of multiple devices. And then there are other students that, didn't think to kind of turn their computer on until a minute before rehearsal started, and didn't know they had to like have a major software update for 20 minutes, and everyone says, oh, digital natives and this and that, like and generational things around who knows what. And actually, I don't know, like those are too generalizing. Like everyone was coming into this with different sets of comfortabilities, and whether they be with technology or I think even more importantly, like the comfortabilities of the spaces that they're in, which are it becomes a very personal thing, right? Like normally in a black box studio or something, like a blank space that we define as a group, as teachers and learners, of how that space is used. But now we're in everyone's home, and there's all sorts of things that are exposing or not exposing, or who's got family in the background, or interruptions, and that's all very different. I don't know, I guess I go back to like what I said a bit earlier, that in this module always somehow brings out or forces the best out of people. And in some ways this online variable scenario, and I say like, this is not how I want to be creating theater like for the long term, but it really did push some students to show their best, and for me also to get to know some of the students in ways that I don't know them. Somehow I got to see other sides of them through this process, and I think that's a fascinating thing as well. Because right, theater people are interested in people, right?
Yeah, well done with the piece. That was, and well done to your students.
No, thank you for having me. It's an honor. Always happy as a Brooklyn College alumni to come back into the fold. And I guess, maybe this year I'll be able to it's been quite a few years since I've seen some work over at Brooklyn College. But maybe this year I'll be able to get to see it, which is the beauty of this virtual thing, is that actually people now have access to theater or can perform their work to audiences that wouldn't normally have accessed it if they weren't, in that place. So that's probably the one shining light,
Great. Well, thank you so much, John Michael, and stay tuned. There'll be some questions from our audience. Hi, folks. Okay. Thank you so much for that interview, JM. I know we had many discussions over multiple days. So I'm going to invite our guests, Daniele and JM, to open up their windows and join us in the room. Backstage, please do the same. So we'll all populate the Zoom space together. And also want to shout out to the University of Northampton students. Really well done. That was a long sort of endeavor for you all, and yeah, excellent work. And to John Michael's fellow colleagues who helped him mount that production. So I'm going to hand off to Byron, and Byron, I know the YouTube might need to catch up to us a little bit. So do you want to start off with one of your questions, and then we'll listen to some questions from anyone attending?
Sure. We actually have a couple of questions from the chat. This one is coming from Frank. It is for John Michael. Frank asks, how would John Michael classify or define the medium of the final product of this work?
I don't know. That's a really difficult question. I hesitate to call it Zoom theater because I don't want a Zoom theater movement. I don't know. It's a play. It's still, to me, it's still it's not film and it's not television the way it was conceptualized, because it wouldn't pass for that. So I don't know. It's theater in the age of Corona.
Awesome. Frank actually has another question. They ask, would someone classify live Zoom of a traditional drama, let's say like Death of a Salesman, as the same art form? So I think the question is asking, would you consider, let's say, a production of Death of a Salesman presented online as still being the same type of art form?
Does anybody in the room want to take that one? I think how I can respond to it as a production manager, because I've thought about it a lot, is that, I think we struggle sometimes because we're trying to sever something that's tangible. Theater and the presentation of theater has actually always been connected to a piece of architecture, right? So we have to buy a ticket to go to a specific building that is a designated performance space. Sometimes these spaces can actually be site specific. When you look at shows like Sleep No More, that's not a traditional theater, nor is it a traditional format, but it does happen in like this architectural space. And, the architectural space could be sort of even in a classroom, you just move the chairs and you stand up and you start to deliver the piece. It's like plays have been connected to their theatrical sort of architectural space, and that has then informed how things are designed, because you look at the space, your venue, and then you look at what are the stage equipment in this venue, what is the relationship between the audience and the actor. Some spaces allow you to be flexible, some not. So I think what's hard in this moment, and including for me as a production manager who has to now plan a digital sort of, some digital presentations coming up for our college, is, so what is that art? What stands in for that? And really what stands in for that is just the web, the sort of, it's like saying, oh, we don't have an architectural space, we just have the universe. Like that's what we have, because it sort of feels that way, because when you do things digitally, it feels really infinite. I think I think we'll all have to think and maybe open our poetry books to find a really good word for what that could be. This series is called the Digital Theater Series, but it's mainly because, all things, the infrastructure is living in the information technology system and in the digital system. So like maybe we call it digital theater, but that also doesn't feel right, because at every step, whether we do things virtually or we do things in a building, there's always people involved. And sometimes that word digital theater, it just like excludes the people. And so I think we'll put it to our audience. Maybe we'll take submissions. We'll open it up and say, coin the word. Let's see what we got. I'll call NPR. We can make it a game.
Awesome. I actually have a question for Daniele, and it kind of ties into what Niluka was talking about. In the absence of physical space, physical architecture, and sort of, you talked about acknowledging the reality and adapting to the reality. Have you gotten any feedback from your audience in terms of how they've experienced this work remotely themselves, and that sort of influencing their experience with the work, or anything you can touch on there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've gotten different feedback depending on where people experience the play. So the first time I listened to it like the minute we got the email. So it was like 1 a.m, and it was like I was with my eyes closed at night, like in my headphones, being like, this is amazing, having this very ethereal experience. But it's read differently to audiences that are working while they're doing it or doing it in daylight, because, I mean, theater requires, I think, an audience depending on which philosophy of it you look at. But in this case, you don't know what that audience is doing. This is the first time I've seen a form of theater where you don't see the audience. Like, you can't be mad if they're on their cell phone. You can't, like, you just have to sort of roll with it. I find that people connect and respond to different moments of the piece depending on where they are. So it's usually like, I think anyone I've spoken to that has had an experience similar to mine has told me that last scene where like it all comes to a finish and we answer the question of the play, right? Which you'd have to listen to find out. I won't ruin it. Like, that is what hit for some people. For other people, it was, especially with regard to what was trending in the news when we made it and what started to trend in the news after we produced it, right? The response to different parts of the plot is what we're getting the most varied feedback on. I hope that answers your question. That was kind of long-winded, but I hope it answers the question.
Totally, thank you. John Michael, similar question to you, but in terms of the lack of physical space and, adapting to where we are, what were sort of some of the limitations that pushed you into maybe an area or a different part of your process that you're excited about? And maybe also, what areas are you sorely missing, are you longing for in creating work right now?
I think I let go of a lot of things that were more about process of, I'm really into ball tossing and ball throwing, and that's kind of the premise of how I build an ensemble and the warm-ups, that you come into the space and there's music blasting, and I'm very particular about the music palette that you walk into, and usually there's like balls and then objects and things being thrown around in like at least 40 minutes of chaos before we like dive into the work. And that sort of, there was none of that, right? And I realized kind of halfway through this process that actually I had abandoned warm-ups completely. And I just felt like that was such sacrilege, you know, but I couldn't, it took a while to figure out what did a warm-up or a moment of kind of grounding need to be. And maybe it's just something as simple as sort of counting together or breathing. And the music palette was the other thing that I had to let go of, because if we were going to stream it live and put it to YouTube or Vimeo, all that music that I can use in the context of an educational piece of theater and a live one-time performance, we don't have the rights to the music that I would normally I'm pulling from my sound library. So, and that was probably the hardest thing for me, to just be like, all right, I'm letting go of my palette. But then that birthed this idea of the Band of Grey, because I mentioned in the interview that we were kind of looking at the work of Basquiat, and he was in a kind of a noise art band in the early 80s, like just before his career, called the Grey Band. So I was like, all right, the Band of Grey, I'm gonna like make noise. We're gonna and at first the dream was I was gonna somehow start a band with the class, but we were running out of time, and I had a guitar and a melodica and some pots and pans and spoons in my flat, and I spent a weekend making that kind of crazy soundscape. And I think it worked better than if we used the music that I was using in the context of the original version. So I guess that would be an example of kind of innovation bleeding out, and maybe also letting go of the body. It was just became so clear that it was a sitting performance, which I like kind of normally avoid, and I don't want anyone sitting in a chair in any show, you know. And this was like, oh well, they're all in their homes and they're sitting like we're all sitting right now, and it's going to be an uphill battle for me to get them to be like bouncing around their bedrooms. But then that kind of forced me to think about angles and camera angles and things that I would never really think about. And then it became about like, no, yeah, really, I want you to like hold the thing above your head.
Awesome, thank you. I think I'd like to pose maybe at least one more question to both of you. And maybe it's just the same question for you both, which is, what words, what sentiments, what thoughts can you share with theater students, emerging theater artists, as we're going through this period of defining and redefining what our art form is? What would you like to leave emerging artists with?
Oh man, so I make a habit of telling the truth, and I'm going to be 100% honest. I have emerged as a undergraduate 3 months ago. I can probably speak very little to what advice I would give emerging artists, because if I had to talk to a peer, I'd say that I am not much further along than you. And I'm also figuring it out. I feel like maybe this is John Michael's question, just because he has so much more experience.
I don't know. I don't know if it's a thing of experience, because I was just trying to think back to like other catastrophes, you know, like I remember, you know, when I was an undergrad was when 9/11 happened. And yeah, we can say great artwork comes out of difficult, trying times of social unrest, which is what we're in right now for a multitude of reasons. But actually, in those scenarios, the theaters weren't closed. You know, the ability to be in a space. In fact, in those moments, people went to each other for physical contact. And I didn't even answer the first part of your question before, which is like, what do I miss most? Which is like physical contact, being in a room, in a space with people and breathing the same air, and those moments. And with an audience as well, like as well as your collaborators. So as far as advice, like, and you know, working in this way until further notice, I mean, I guess it's still about story and communication, right? And how you're going to tell the story. And I think theater makers are the kind of the most skilled, you know, they should be the people that are politicians and running the government, and because they're solution finders, and they find a way to get the message across, no matter what the given circumstances of either the play or the performance space or the moment in time is. So Actually, my advice is go run for office.
That is really good advice. I want to add that, and I'm sure like sort of, all six of us and the folks attending too. I think like there's a couple of challenges because right now, because everything is remote, suddenly you find yourself without the time to like, there's so much content out there. So there is lots of content out there. People are doing all sorts of things. I think I just heard the other day where there's an artist that you have to go to a site. So it's like the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And then you're listening on your phone to like the telling of a story while you're walking through, which was amazing. And it just reminded me that, yeah, when one door closes, these smaller other sort of doors, big and small, are opening, and it's a great moment of discovery for our own for this art form, which is thousands of years old, right? Theater is so old. It goes back to sort of cave paintings and stories being told by the fireplace, by sort of our ancestors, and that idea of like ritual and things like that, which is it's a very deep-seated sort of idea that has sort of traversed through all of this time. And yes, I think theater definitely has this very strong hold on togetherness, because even from back then, sitting around telling a story, I think that's like the hardest thing for all of us to cope with. But because of where we are with technology now, we found a way to be together, and even like in insurmountable ways. John Michael is in the United Kingdom, and we would not be able to, we had the ability to like Skype or Zoom before when we had the theaters opened, but because of how busy we were, we never really got around to it. And even like this web series only exists because of the circumstances we find ourselves in. So it's just, there's always like other things that are sort of blossoming, even when it feels like everything is in hibernation, which is really cool. And it might actually really help us be even stronger storytellers, because it kind of forces us to sort of deconstruct the form, and then like recognize also, oh yeah, what are the traditional conventions, and there might be some other movement that comes out of this, similar to sort of like the little theater movement happening, around the time of the Great Depression, where something else is going to come out of it, other forms of theater, maybe like, there's a great boom in sort of site-specific work, or something different is on the horizon for sure, because of all the work that artists are doing to try to find other ways and other forms and use certain digital tools to get their work across. What's the toughest thing, I think, for theater right now is there are a huge amount of people who are trained and have these very specialized skills that are without work, and that's sort of like the bitter pill. But this kind of sort of series is, and just to kind of also say a little bit more about this series in particular that's launching, there's another element to it called a free knowledge exchange, and the idea is to have like on our website at Brooklyn College, it's open to anybody in our faculty, our staff, our students, it's undergrad, it's masters. It's like an open source where you have something you discovered while you are sort of dealing with sort of digital theater, or whether it could be something connected to the technology, or it could be something connected to the storytelling. Great, make a 10-minute video, like a webinar, and we'll post it. And it's a place to like collect and share, because like in times like this, I think like sharing your discoveries with other artists will hopefully help them also figure out how to take their unique skill and figure out how to apply it, because it is very scary too. A lot of folks have a training in very specific physical skills, and they need that shop, or they need to work in the theater in order to be able to execute it. I think for designers and actors, it is possible to do more things. For technicians, it's a bit hard. It's really connected to the physical equipment and the architectural venue. But yeah, I'm sort of promoting like how all artists at this time doing any kind of digital work should just open source, figure out how to share as much as possible, because don't really know what's on the horizon, but it is certainly exciting. So Does anybody have any, are there any more questions on the YouTube feed, Byron, that you see? And if there isn't, Shanu, Cody, or Danny and John Michael, any last words? This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much. I think Shanu and I had like goosebumps as we were
Yes,
checking
for
each other.
sure. For sure. This was such a great discussion. I think everyone can take a little bit of something to figure out how we continue our art from here. We cannot let it stop. Can't. And between Daniele and John Michael's, both of their productions, those are really strong ways that we can see a future through what we're in, how we continue our platform. I really appreciate you guys coming out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give a shout out. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever release like a full interview or that we should because they're long, but I'm sure that editing all of that took an obscene amount of work. And I think that was really well done. The transitions were, from what I'm hearing, pretty beautiful to watch. So I guess I'll see soon, but I don't doubt it. Thank you guys. This has all been really surreal. My mind continues to be blown by effort.
Yeah, I also want to thank you guys. I mean, I have to say that when I first logged on to Zoom earlier to join you guys, there was already an energy on the screen of like people that were in that production mode. That was the kind of moment of the tech booth that I had missed with leaving it on. Was like, oh, like yeah, they're in a mode. I don't even want to like disrupt it, like, but it feels good and it felt right and it felt familiar. So thanks for all the work you guys put into this, because I know me and DeLuca rambled for like 18 hours. So.
We did. And so it was up to Cody and Shanu to do their magic with the editing for them. And you know, it's an appropriate way to actually end this first episode, because you know, when life imitates art, here we were trying to produce a web series about artists taking a leap of faith and doing, you know, working, you know, in a medium. You know, Danny, you had experience with the radio form, but still it's about delivering it virtually. And, you know, JM, this was all completely new. And then we were experiencing the same thing because like I said at the beginning, this actually, no, not this time, about sort of, you know, a few hours ago, but yesterday I was still, you know, reading online articles, calling the technical staff at Brooklyn College. Thank you, Michael Redman and Jeff, to help figure out how to do the web stream. And sometimes what's great is committing to a piece of art. You don't know, as you said, John Michael, you don't know what's going to happen at the end of it. Plug a date in. Promise that you're going to do it, and the deadline of having a production is going to drive you to get there. So that's what happened this morning, that's for sure. But thanks everybody for being here. Thank you also to all of the good souls at Brooklyn College Theater Department. I've spoken to many of the tech staff just to help me like work out this web series. So I just want to say thank you to them. And please, students, faculty, and staff, if you have content that you want to share, Shanu and Byron and Cody and I will help put it on the web series and present it. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good night.
Out.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.